Good evening.
Welcome. Find a comfortable position, relax your shoulders, and let the noise of the day fade away. You are safe here, in the quiet archives of the blockchain. Tonight we aren't hunting for bugs with anxiety or haste. We are simply observing them, like watching rain fall against a window pane. Before us lies a long, peaceful journey. We have 46 stories to tell, woven across 31 different protocols. From the halls of Clover to the fields of Blueberry and Union Finance. We will drift through the complexities of business logic, where human intention and machine code quietly diverge. We will witness the silence of denial of service, where the machinery simply stops. We will see the swift currents of front-running and the sudden temporary nature of flash loans. Each vulnerability is not a failure tonight, but a lesson, preserved in amber. Let us begin with our first volume, Astaria, a story of access control and the quiet importance of knowing who holds the keys. Let us turn our attention to Astaria, a protocol designed to hold value and manage loans. Deep within the Vault implementation contract, a function named Validate Commitment quietly sits. Its purpose is noble, simply to ensure that when a lien, a debt, is requested, the one receiving it actually holds the rights to the collateral. The code gently looks at the receiver and compares them to the collateral holder, ensuring they are one and the same. But here, in the silence of the logic, a subtle assumption is made. The code assumes that if the receiver is the holder, then the holder must have wanted the loan. But notice, it forgets to ask who is calling. Because the code does not verify the sender, a stranger could step in. They could call the function, simply pointing to the holder's address as the receiver. The contract looks, sees the receiver matches the holder, and nods in agreement. And just like that, a loan is forced upon an unsuspecting soul, burdened with debt, interest, and risk of liquidation, for a promise they never made. To restore peace to the vault, we must strengthen the gates. The fix is to listen closer to the caller's voice. We change the rules so that only the true holder or their trusted operator can initiate the commitment. Consent is once again required. And as the dust settles on Astaria, we drift further downstream. Our journey continues to the Terplayer BVT staking and distribution protocol, where we will discover the quiet dangers of an overflow. While Astaria struggled with the heavy gates of access control, we now turn to Terplayer, where the issue is not about who holds the key, but rather a subtle tragedy of mathematics. Imagine a staking system designed like a web of trust. Users can delegate their stakes to others, spreading their influence. When it comes time to withdraw, the contract has a gentle task. It looks at all the places your funds are resting and pulls a portion from each, bringing them home to you. It loops through every user you have delegated to, calculating the precise share to retrieve. But listen closely to the logic inside this loop. The contract uses a specific formula to calculate the withdrawal amount, a ceiling division. It intends to round up, ensuring nothing is left behind. A noble intention. However, the user is included in their own delegation list. As the code iterates, it calculates the amounts, rounding up each time. Because the user is counted among the delegates, the total sum of these rounded up portions grows slightly larger than the actual amount requested. And here is where the silence falls. The contract attempts to calculate the remaining amount by subtracting this inflated total from the original request. But you cannot subtract a larger number from a smaller one in this realm. An underflow occurs, the transaction reverts, the funds are locked, trapped by a fraction of a number. The resolution comes with a gentle separation. We must exclude the user from the delegation loop, treating the self differently than the others. By handling the user's portion separately and using floor division to prevent overcalculation, the math aligns once more. The tension resolves, and the funds are free to move. And as we see how Terplayer untangled its numbers, we prepare to drift toward GTE, where the next high-severity mystery is waiting to be uncovered. While Terplayer struggled with the chaos of numbers overflowing their bounds, we now float gently towards the GTE protocol. Here, we find a structure known as a central limit order book. Imagine it not as code, but as a delicate chain of people standing in line. Buyers and sellers, holding hands. To keep this line orderly, the system uses what we call a double-linked list. Each order is supposed to know exactly who stands in front of it and who stands behind. A perfect, unbroken chain of memory. We drift into the function called add order to book. It seems diligent. It calls a helper function, update limit post order, to place the new request in line. But listen closely to the silence between the lines. Something is forgotten. The code calculates the link to the previous order, but it never writes it down. It is a memory that fades the moment it is born. The property, preview OID, is calculated in memory, but never saved to storage. Do you see the break in the chain? Without this backward link, the list becomes fragile. When the system tries to look behind, to traverse the list or remove an order, it finds nothing but a void. The order book becomes confused, full, and eventually, it simply stops. A denial of service, born from a single, missing memory. The remedy is as gentle as a reminder. We simply ensure that the previous order ID is not just calculated, but persisted, written deeply into the storage, making the link solid and true. The hands are rejoined. The chain becomes whole again, and the orders flow like water. And as the order book finds its rhythm again, we prepare to drift toward PoolTogether, where the logic of mathematics itself will be our next dream. While GTE wrestled with the complexities of its logic, we now turn our gaze to the flowing waters of PoolTogether. Imagine a prize pool, a communal vault waiting to select a winner. To close a drawer and pick that winner, the protocol relies on a random number and a relay auction to bring that number home. It is a delicate dance of incentives, ensuring those who help close the drawer are fairly rewarded. In the RNG relay auction contract, there is a function called RNG complete. Its purpose is to finalize the process. First, it calls close draw on the prize pool. This is a crucial moment. When close draw executes, it takes the funds from the current open draw and gently moves them into the main reserve. The books are balanced. The funds have moved. But here, in the quiet calculation of rewards, the contract becomes confused. To determine how much to pay the relayer, it calculates a value called future reserve. It takes the current reserve and adds the reserve for open draw to it. Do you see the echo? Because closed draw had already run, The open draw funds were already inside the reserve. By adding them again, the contract sees a phantom surplus. It believes the pool is larger than it truly is. And because the pool looks larger, the rewards flow too freely. Too many tokens are distributed based on a mirage of wealth. The resolution is one of stillness. We stop the unnecessary motion. We realize that closed draw has already done the work. The fix is simply to look at the reserve as it is, without adding the open draw funds a second time. We trust the state of the contract. And as we see how PoolTogether restored balance to its rewards, Gainsnetwork awaits us to show us the dangers of wrong math. While PoolTogether wrestled with the complexities of its mathematical logic, we now drift quietly toward the Gainsnetwork, where the numbers tell a different story. Imagine a trader, confident and calm, wishing to increase the size of their position. They want to add more collateral to deepen their stake in the market. To allow this, the protocol must perform a check. It must calculate the new leverage, the new ratio of risk to asset, to ensure everything remains safe. It is a standard procedure, a gatekeeper standing silently at the entrance of the transaction. The function, known as validate request, begins its work. It looks at the trade, takes the new collateral amount, and prepares to run the numbers. But here, in the quiet calculation of the new leverage variable, a shadow falls across the logic. When the request is not explicitly a leverage update, the code attempts to derive the new leverage manually. Listen closely to the formula. It takes the existing position size, adds the change in position, and divides it by the new collateral amount. It seems logical, but notice the variable position size collateral delta. This value is used to determine if the request is valid. However, the calculation relies on this delta in a way that misrepresents the true leverage of the final position. It creates a mirage. Because the leverage is calculated incorrectly, the resulting number might appear safe. It might sit comfortably within the allowed limits, while in reality, it violates the protocol's safety checks. The gatekeeper nods and opens the door, deceived by a flaw in its own arithmetic. The request is approved, bypassing the intended safeguards. To restore peace to the system, the calculation must be grounded in truth. We must ensure that new leverage is derived from the actual final position size relative to the collateral, removing the ambiguity. By correcting the formula, the gatekeeper sees clearly again, and only safe positions are allowed to pass. And as we see how Gainsnetwork realigned its leverage calculations, the protocol known as sequence waits in the distance, ready to reveal a high-severity lesson of its own. While Gainsnetwork struggled with the silent drift of incorrect mathematics, we now turn our gaze to the sequence protocol. Here the danger is not in the calculation, but in the integrity of a promise. Imagine a function called execute. It is designed to carry a bundle of actions, a payload of intentions, wrapped together with a digital signature. The code receives this bundle. It gently consumes a nonce to ensure order, validates the signature, and then it attempts to perform the actions, one by one. It seems like a robust system, a list of tasks, signed and sealed. But let us look closer at the logic of the session calls. Specifically, what happens when things go wrong? If a call fails, the transaction reverts. The state rolls back as if nothing happened. But here lies the oversight. The signature remains valid. Consider an attacker watching the mempool, seeing a multi-call session. They notice that even if the whole bundle fails, the signature still holds power. They can take that signature and use it to execute only a subset of the calls. They can fracture the bundle. It is a partial signature replay, like taking a single sentence out of a letter and claiming it was the whole message. They can front-run the user, executing only the parts that benefit them, bypassing the security of the whole. To mend this fractured trust, the resolution is one of unity. We must bind the session call signature to the complete payload hash. By doing this, the signature becomes inseparable from the entire sequence. It is all or nothing. No partial truths allowed. And as we see how sequence secured the integrity of the bundle, Subsquid waits in the shadows, ready to show us the dangers of access control. While sequence faced its high severity challenges, we now turn to Subsquid and a vulnerability that hides in plain sight, waiting for the opportunistic traveler. Imagine a bridge being built between two worlds. On one side we have the main layer, and on the other, layer 2. The TSQD contract sits quietly, waiting to establish a permanent link with its twin across the void. To do this, it relies on a function called register token on L2. It is a handshake intended to introduce the token to the Arbitrum gateway. The code prepares the parameters, the gas limits, the costs, and most importantly, the address of the token on the other side. Once called, it sets a flag, should register gateway becomes true, and the bond is sealed. But look at the function signature with me. It stands there unadorned, public, payable. There is no guard at the door, no requirement that the caller be the architect of the system. This is where the shadow slips in. Because there is no access control, anyone can call this function. An attacker, watching the mempool like a hawk, can spot the legitimate registration attempt. They can rush ahead, front-running the transaction with their own call. Instead of the correct token address, they insert their own. The gateway registers the wrong destination. The bridge is built, but it leads to nowhere. And because the system believes the work is done, the damage is often irreversible. The bridge is broken before the first traveler can cross. The resolution brings a sense of order back to the chaos. We simply need to lock the door. By implementing the ownable functionality, we place a gentle but firm restriction on the function. We add a modifier that ensures only the owner, the true administrator, can initiate this critical handshake. The function remains ready, but now it only answers to the master's voice. And as we see how Subsquid secured its gates against strangers, AI Arena waits in the distance to show us the dizzying loops of re-entrancy. While Subsquid wrestled with the quiet questions of access control, we now drift toward the bustling digital stadium of AI Arena. Here, in this virtual coliseum, champions fight for glory. And when the dust settles, the victors step forward to call the claim rewards function. It is a moment of celebration. The contract prepares to mint a new fighter NFT, a unique token of their triumph, and send it to the winner's wallet. But within this ceremony of rewards, a loop lies hidden. You see, when the contract mints the NFT and sends it to the winner, it hands over execution control. It politely knocks on the receiver's door, and here is where the sleepless mind finds an opening. If the winner is a smart contract, it can catch that NFT using a function called onERC721received. And in that split second, before the Arena contract has finished updating the records to say, this reward is claimed, the attacker calls claim rewards again. The contract, still paused in the middle of the first delivery, doesn't yet know the limit has been reached. It sees the round ID, assumes the claim is valid, and mints another fighter. And another. A recursive loop, draining the arena of its champions one after the other. To restore peace to the stadium, the developers applied a timeless remedy. They introduced the non-reentrant modifier. Like a heavy gate that locks automatically, this modifier ensures that once a claim begins, no one, not even the recipient, can enter the function again until the first process is fully and quietly complete. The loop is broken. The rewards are safe. And as we leave the secure gates of the arena behind us, we prepare to witness a different kind of pressure. Olympus update awaits us next, where we will study the crushing weight of a sandwich attack. While AI Arena struggled with the dizzying loops of reentrancy, we now turn our gaze to the Olympus protocol. Here, the danger is not in the repetition, but in the timing. Imagine a vault, specifically the BL vault for Lido. It sits quietly on the blockchain, holding its assets, waiting patiently to understand its own value. To do this, it listens to an oracle, a distant voice from the outside world, gently telling it the current price of the token. It seems like a peaceful arrangement. The vault listens, and the vault updates. But in the delicate space between moments, a shadow creates a strategy. The vulnerability here is known as a sandwich attack. It is a matter of being faster than the truth. An adversary watches for the oracle to speak, just before the price updates. They deposit their funds. Then, the oracle updates, shifting the value of the assets. And immediately, before anyone else can breathe, the attacker withdraws. Because the pool price and the oracle price were momentarily out of sync, they are able to siphon off the WST ETH. They take the profit from the mismatch, leaving the vault lighter than before. The solution, as is often the case in life, is simply patience. To prevent this rapid theft, we introduce a time lock. We ask the user to stay a while. By locking the funds for a minimum time, perhaps 24 hours, the opportunity to slip in and out of the oracle's update window simply vanishes. The frantic pace of the sandwich attack is slowed to a halt. And as we see how Olympus found peace in stillness, the Napier protocol waits for us on the horizon, where we will uncover the quiet tragedy of wrong math. While Olympus struggled against the invisible pressure of sandwich attacks and oracle manipulations, we now turn our gaze to the Napier protocol. Here the water is still. We find ourselves within the tranche contract, a place where principal tokens and yield tokens, or YTs, quietly coexist. The function we are observing is called Redeem with YT. It is a mechanism designed for release, allowing a user to exchange their yield tokens for the underlying assets they have earned. It seems like a standard exchange. The code allows one person to act on behalf of another, provided they have an allowance. A gesture of trust. The contract dutifully calculates how much interest has grown over time, a variable it calls accrued in target. It measures the total weight of the yield waiting to be claimed. But as the logic flows down to the moment of transfer, something heavy slips through. When the contract prepares to send funds to the adapter, it adds the shares redeemed to accrued in target. Do you see it? It sends the accrued in target. Not a portion, not a fraction, but the entire accumulated yield. This means that if a user grants an allowance, even a microscopic allowance, of just one single way, the caller can redeem that tiny speck, Yet the contract will trigger the transfer of the user's entire, unaccrued yield. The logic failed to slice the pie. It tried to serve the whole banquet on a single small plate. The yield is drained simply because the door was left ajar by the smallest crack. To restore harmony, the developers had to teach the code about proportion. They introduced a new calculation, accrued proportional. Now the contract gently asks, if you are redeeming 10% of the tokens, you shall receive only 10% of the yield. The math was corrected. The remaining yield stays safely in the vault, waiting for its true moment to be claimed. And as we see how Napier learned to measure its generosity, the shadows lengthen, and we drift toward Telcoin, where a checkpoint mechanism and a flash loan are about to collide in the dark. While Napier struggled with the quiet precision of its mathematics, we now turn our gaze to Telcoin. Here the issue is not just about numbers, but about time itself. The Telcoin staking module sits patiently, waiting for users to lock away their tokens, promising rewards for their loyalty. It uses a system of checkpoints to remember who held what and when. But within the function that checks these values, a shadow lingers. Imagine a visitor who arrives and leaves in the exact same instant, a flash loan. An attacker borrows a massive amount of TEL tokens, stakes them into the system, and then, before the block is even finished, withdraws them entirely. The system looks at the block. It sees the entry. It sees the massive stake. It believes the commitment was real. Because the code retrieves the value of the first checkpoint in that same block, it is tricked into awarding rewards for a loyalty that never truly existed. A huge stake, faked with minimal cost, vanishing like a dream. To dispel this illusion, we must demand the passage of time. The resolution is gentle but firm. We simply require that the exit must happen at least one block after the original stake. One cannot arrive and depart in the same breath. By enforcing this small delay, the flash loan's magic is broken, and the rewards remain only for those who truly stay. And as we see how Telcoin learned to respect the flow of blocks, Blueberry update number 3 waits on the horizon, ready to show us the dangers of oracles and the math that binds them. While Telcoin struggled with the rapid, chaotic movements of flash loans and checkpoints, we now turn our gaze to the Blueberry protocol. Here, the danger lies not in speed, but in perception. Specifically, in how we value a balancer pool token. Imagine a quiet vault where you deposit tokens to borrow others. To keep this balance safe, the protocol must know exactly what your deposit is worth. This is the sacred duty of the Oracle. In this chapter of Blueberry, the Oracle is tasked with valuing stable BPTs, tokens that represent a share in a stable pool. It seems like a simple task of addition and division, but mathematics requires absolute truth. In the logic of the stable BPT Oracle, a methodology was chosen that drifted away from reality. The calculation inadvertently inflates the value of these tokens. It sees more wealth than truly exists. And here is where the shadow falls. If the Oracle believes a token is worth more than it is, a borrower can borrow far more than they should. They can walk away with the protocol's assets, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and bad debt. It is a silent path to insolvency, born from a simple overestimation. To heal this fracture, the approach had to change. The developers stepped in, gently setting aside the old formula. By implementing a new, robust pricing methodology, the illusion of inflated value was dispelled. The Oracle now speaks the truth, ensuring that every borrowed asset is backed by real value. And just as we correct the valuation logic within Blueberry, we prepare to look even deeper into the numbers. Next, the ZAP protocol awaits us, with a calculation that simply doesn't add up. While Blueberry update number 3 struggled with the heavy weight of its mathematical precision, we now turn our gaze to the ZAP protocol, where another calculation quietly loses its way. Imagine the end of a private sale period. The noise of the market has died down, and users return to the protocol, seeking to claim a tax refund. It is meant to be a fair system, based on a user's maximum tax-free allocation. The contract checks the numbers, intending to return what is rightfully owed to the user, ensuring that the tax burden is lightened by their specific allowance. The logic begins innocently enough. It checks if the user's share fits entirely within their tax-free allocation. If it does, the full tax amount is refunded. A perfect circle. But consider the alternative. Simply ask yourself, what happens when the user's share exceeds that safe, tax-free harbor? Here is where the numbers drift apart. In the code, when the share is larger than the allocation, the protocol attempts to calculate the partial refund. It takes the left amount, the unused funds, and multiplies it by the tax rate. But notice what is missing. It calculates the refund only on the unused amount, completely ignoring the tax-free allocation itself. By forgetting to add the tax-free portion back into the calculation, the protocol quietly withholds a portion of the refund. The user receives less than they deserve, and the math remains incomplete. To restore harmony, the formula must be made whole. The fix is gentle. Instead of looking only at the left amount, we simply add the tax-free allocation to it, before applying the tax rate. By summing the left amount and the allocation, the refund reflects the true value. And as we see how ZAP protocol corrected this ledger, we prepare to drift back to Blueberry, where a read-only reentrancy waits in the silence of the oracles. While the ZAP protocol struggled with the cold logic of incorrect mathematics, we now float gently towards the Blueberry update. Here we find the balancer pair oracle. Its duty is simple, almost meditative. It exists to calculate the true value of a balancer pool token. To find this truth, it gazes at two things: the token balances resting quietly in the vault, and the total supply of pool tokens in existence. It divides the assets by the supply to find the price. But in the silence between states, a shadow moves. This is a case of read-only reentrancy. Imagine an attacker joining a balancer pool. The vault, in its generosity, returns excess ether to the sender. And here is the opening. The attacker catches this ether and re-enters the system before the transaction finishes. At this precise moment, the total supply of tokens has increased. But the vault has not yet updated the internal balances. They are out of sync. So when the oracle looks, it sees the old, smaller balances, divided by the new, inflated supply. The math breaks. The price plummets artificially, and innocent positions are liquidated based on a lie. To bring peace back to the protocol, we must respect the boundaries of the vault. The solution lies in checking the reentrancy guard. We must ask the vault if it is currently busy, before we trust the numbers it whispers to us. By ensuring the vault is not in a state of flux, the oracle speaks only the truth. And as we see how Blueberry learned to wait for the dust to settle, Real Wagme number 2 prepares to show us another face of reentrancy. While the Blueberry protocol struggled with the subtle, ghostly echoes of read-only reentrancy, we now drift toward Real Wagme, where the danger lies not just in looking but in touching. Imagine a function named takeover debt. It sounds like a resolution, doesn't it? A way to settle accounts and bring balance to the ledger. In the Liquidity Manager contract, this function exists to liquidate positions, to repay liquidity providers from the vault. It is meant to be a final act, a closing of the book on a specific loan. The code intends to take the position, swap the assets on Uniswap v3, and then quietly erase the debt from its memory. But listen closely to the rhythm of the code. To perform the swap, the contract must send tokens out. And in the world of Uniswap v3, when tokens move, control is briefly handed back to the receiver. It is a polite conversation, a callback. But here lies the oversight. The contract has not yet written down that the debt is paid. The storage, the memory of the loan, is still fully intact. The code is waiting to update the ledger until after the swap is finished. So when control is handed to the attacker during the swap, they see the door is still wide open. They call takeover debt again. Since the first call hasn't finished writing its history, the second call sees a valid debt and liquidates it a second time. The vault pays out twice for the same loan, draining its life force, while the position remains open, a ghost that refuses to leave. The remedy, as it often is in these quiet tragedies, is a simple guard. The developers introduced the non-reentrant modifier, a lock on the door. Now when the function is entered, the lock engages. Even if the code reaches out to the world, no one can step back inside until the work is done and the memory is safely updated. The cycle is broken and the vault is safe. And as we see how real WAGMI secured its doors against this double entry, we prepare to drift toward Arcadia, where the shadows of re-entrancy will visit us once more. While real WAGMI face the echoing loops of re-entrancy, we now turn our gaze to the Arcadia protocol. Here, re-entrancy is not just a thief but a key, unlocking a logic error that hides in plain sight. Imagine a function called flash action. It is a powerful tool. It allows a user to borrow funds, send them to a target, perform a task, and return, all within the span of a single transaction. To keep the system healthy, the protocol enforces a minimum value. Every account must hold enough collateral to be worth tracking. It is a safety flaw, a quiet rule ensuring stability. But consider a user who deposits collateral that sits just barely above that floor. They trigger the flash action. The funds move to a target contract. And here, the re-entrancy begins. The target contract turns around and triggers a liquidation on the very account executing the action. Now, watch what the system sees. Because the action is midway and a bid is placed, the account's value dips slightly below that minimum safety floor. The function responsible for checking the value sees it is below the minimum and simply returns 0. It tells the liquidator that the account is empty, even though it is not. This is the critical moment. Believing the collateral is 0, the liquidator enters what is called the unhappy flow. It settles the debt incorrectly, allowing the attacker to drain the pool, all because the system refused to see the small value that was actually there. The resolution comes from a place of honesty. The developers realize that truth is more important than thresholds. In the settlement function, they change the code to fetch the real collateral value, even if it sits below the minimum line. By acknowledging the dust that remains, rather than rounding it to nothing, the math balances, and the pool is safe. And as we see how Arcadia learned to value even the smallest amounts, perennial V2 waits in the distance, ready to show us what happens when we trust the wrong messenger, the Oracle. While Arcadia struggled with the chaotic loops of re-entrancy, we now drift toward perennial V2. Here, the challenge is not about repetition, but about time, and the quiet expectations of an oracle. The contract relies on a function called commit requested. It waits patiently for a price to be delivered from the outside world. If the price arrives within the timeout window, all is well. The system records the value and the market moves forward. But consider the moment when time runs out. The request has expired. Logic dictates that this version should be marked invalid, a void where a price should be. Yet the code made a different choice. Instead of invalidating the expired request, it simply copied the previous price into the current slot. It disguised the past as the present. This meant orders that should have been invalidated remained open, kept alive by a stale echo of value. The market continued to trade on a memory rather than reality. To restore truth to the timeline, the developers introduced a validity map. Now the system explicitly tracks not just the price, but whether that price is valid. If the time has expired, the system acknowledges the void, rather than filling it with old data. And as Perennial learns to respect the expiration of time, Blueberry update number 3 awaits us, ready to teach us about the precision of mathematics and the delicate dance of decimals. While Perennial struggled with the complex flow of Oracle updates, we now turn our gaze to the quiet orchards of Blueberry. Here, amidst the digital foliage, sits the curved Tricrypto Oracle. Its duty is noble and precise. It exists to determine the value of a liquidation price token. Imagine it as a translator, meant to tell the protocol exactly what your position is worth, expressed clearly in United States dollars. It relies on a function called getPrice, and for a moment, everything seems to flow perfectly. The math begins to churn, calculating the value of the assets. But this code carries a memory from another life. You see, the logic was borrowed from the sentiment protocol, and in that borrowing, a ghost remained. In the original design, the Oracle was meant to speak in terms of Ethereum, but Blueberry expects dollars. The oversight sits quietly at the very end of the calculation. It divides the final value by the price of Ethereum. A simple division. But the result is catastrophic for the sleeper. Instead of a value in dollars, the Oracle returns the value in Ether. To the protocol, the numbers suddenly look completely wrong. Because of this translation error, positions that are perfectly healthy, positions that should be safe and sound, are marked for liquidation. The system believes they are insolvent, simply because it is listening to the wrong currency. The resolution comes with a gentle erasure. We do not need to rewrite the world. We simply stop dividing. By removing the division by the ETH price, the Oracle creates a direct path to the dollar value. The translation becomes accurate. The fear of false liquidation dissolves like mist in the morning sun. And as we see how Blueberry addressed this error of translation, the orchard still holds mysteries, and Blueberry will return to show us yet another twist in the mathematics. While the previous issue in Blueberry dealt with the fragility of oracles, we remain within these quiet orchards for one more discovery. This time concerning the distribution of the harvest itself. Imagine the Wara pools and W convex pools contracts. They are designed to be patient vessels, holding tokens and calculating rewards that accrue over time. Specifically, rewards that arrive in stages, known as cliffs. It is a peaceful arrangement. As time passes, the rewards grow, waiting to be minted, waiting to be claimed. The logic relies on a simple truth, calculating what is owed based on what has not yet been brought into existence. But here is where the calculation drifts into a dream state. The vulnerability lies in the moment of withdrawal. When a user decides to leave the vault, the contract code performs a check. It looks at the aura owed to the user. This math works perfectly, as long as the aura remains unminted. But watch closely what happens when a withdrawal occurs. The withdrawal function triggers a claim for all vault participants, not just the person leaving. It brings the rewards into reality. It mints them. But the distribution logic, it forgets to account for this change. It continues to calculate as if the rewards were still waiting in the ether. Because the rewards are now claimed, but the math expects them to be unminted, the numbers misalign at the end of every cliff. And quietly, the rewards are lost to the void. To restore balance to this garden, a hybrid approach is needed. We must teach the contract to remember. When rewards are claimed upon withdrawal, the reward per token must be cached, gently stored in memory. This ensures that tokens already received are accounted for, while only the truly unminted aura is handled by the old logic. And as we see how Blueberry learned to cache its memories to save its rewards, we prepare to move to Ditto ETH, where we will see how speed and front-running disturb the peace of liquidation. While the mathematical miscalculations of Blueberry Update number 3 fade into the silence, we now turn our gaze to the Ditto ETH protocol. Here, in this digital marketplace, we find a system of short records. These are not merely numbers on a ledger, but positions that can be minted into NFTs. Imagine a debt that you can hold in your hand like a token and pass freely from one person to another. It is a feature designed for flexibility, allowing positions to travel across the blockchain. But within this freedom of movement, a shadow lurks. Consider a user named Alice. She holds a short position, but the market has turned against her. Her collateral is running low, and the position has become unhealthy. It is time for a liquidator, let us call him Bob, to step in, flag the short, and restore balance to the system. Bob sends his transaction, reaching out to flag Alice's debt. But Alice is watching. She sees Bob's intention in the moments before it becomes real. And because she owns the short record as an NFT, she has a trick up her sleeve. Just as Bob's transaction attempts to land, Alice swiftly transfers the NFT to a second address she controls. It is a digital sleight of hand. When Bob's liquidation call finally arrives at Alice's original address, it finds nothing but empty air. The short record has moved. The status has changed. And so, Bob's attempt reverts, failing to find its mark. The bad debt remains, unpunished and dangerous, shielded by the simple act of moving it from one hand to the other. To bring peace back to the protocol, the developers introduced a gentle restriction. Now, within the transfer logic, a guardian stands watch. Before a short record can be moved, the code checks its health. If the collateral ratio is too low, if the position is sick, it cannot travel. It must be healed, made healthy again, before it is allowed to leave. And so the evasion ends. But as the stillness settles over Ditto ETH, we prepare to look at the Mosaic Archimedes protocol, where we will see what happens when the system stops responding entirely. While Ditto ETH face the sharp, frantic rush of front-running liquidations, we now turn our gaze to the Mosaic Archimedes protocol. Here, we find a system of vaults, vast and interconnected. The liquidity provider tokens within are travelers, capable of crossing the bridges between different blockchains using layer 0. They are designed to move freely, flowing like water across the ecosystem, finding their level wherever they go. But strictly tracking water is a difficult task. The protocol relies on a snapshot, a moment in time where it counts the value across all chains to determine the price. Yet, a clever observer can manipulate this timing. Imagine moving your gold from one room to another, just as the accountant walks by. By initiating a bridge transfer, but using a minuscule amount of gas, the attacker can leave their tokens suspended in the void, waiting. Then, at the perfect moment, they provide the gas to finish the journey. This allows the same tokens to be counted multiple times, or to settle at an artificially high price. A ghost in the machine, creating value from nothing but movement and timing. To restore the balance, the team chose the path of simplicity. Rather than building a complex net to track every single movement across the void, they simply closed the gates. By disabling the bridging of these tokens at the configuration level, the ambiguity vanishes. The value stays where it belongs, anchored, still, and true. And as we see how Mosaic found safety in stillness, Morpho will soon show us the intricate dance of business logic and the power of the pause. While the Mosaic Archimedes protocol found itself frozen by a high severity denial of service, we now turn our eyes to the elegant, shifting structures of Morpho. Imagine a governance system, gently deciding when to close a market, to let it retire. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the first of the district, and the setting program sets the person as may to know only both through money. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is a setting the related district to the market. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is an bit known of clode with another market. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only structures of Morpho. There is the only move stability with a many a move scription, which moves some Morpho in the governance of the market. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant system structures. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. For there, we now turn our eyes to the year 6%. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeeperCoding function, there is the only move stability with a many a moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant shifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. In the code, specifically the setIsDeprecated function, there is the only move systemility with Amonia moves. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. We now turn our eyes to the elegant sifting denial of service. Specifically function, there is a sensible rule. Before a market can be deprecated, borrowing must be paused. It feels intuitive. You must stop new loans before you close the doors for good. But in this quiet logic, something was forgotten. The code checks if borrowing is paused, but it does not check if liquidations are paused. And here lies the trap. If a market is deprecated while liquidations are halted, the liquidators are effectively locked out. They cannot step in to settle debts on this closed market. The mechanism becomes stuck, unable to clean itself, trapped in a state where the market is gone, but the debts remain untouchable. The recommendation was gentle. Simply ensure liquidations are active before deprecating the market. However, the builders acknowledged this state, choosing to keep the logic as it stands, aware of the quiet risks. Sometimes, code remains a conversation between safety and flexibility. And as we accept this decision within the governance contract, we shall drift further into Morpho, where another liquidation issue awaits our tired eyes. While the previous chapter of Morpho taught us about the stillness of paused logic, we remain within its walls for another lesson. This time, we look not at what is stopped, but what is empty. Imagine the exit positions manager. It acts as the caretaker of debt within the protocol. When a user's position becomes unhealthy, a liquidator steps in like a gardener pruning a tree. They gently repay the borrowed asset, and in return, they are meant to withdraw the collateral from the underlying pool, be it Aave or compound. It is intended to be a smooth cycle of repayment and retrieval. But consider a dry season. What happens if the underlying pool has no liquidity left? Morpho attempts to withdraw the actual tokens to pay the liquidator, but the pool is empty. The withdrawal fails, and because it fails, the liquidation reverts. The debt remains, growing silently, unchecked, simply because the system insisted on drawing water from a dry well, instead of accepting the deed to the well itself. The wisdom offered here was subtle. The underlying protocols, Aave and compound, allow a liquidator to seize the receipt tokens, the A tokens or C tokens, directly, without needing to drain the pool. While Morpho acknowledged this risk, deciding not to change the architecture for now, it reminds us that sometimes holding the claim to an asset is safer than demanding the asset itself. And as we leave this empty pool behind, we prepare to see how Morpho handles the influx of rewards in our next chapter. While the previous echoes of Morpho's liquidation logic settle into silence, we remain within the same protocol, drifting toward its treasury. Here, a function named Claim to Treasury quietly waits. Its purpose is simple, almost domestic. It gathers the dust, the reserve amounts that accumulate in the contract from peer-to-peer matches. Like a gentle broom, it sweeps these underlying tokens and sends them to the treasury for safekeeping. It is a routine maintenance, intended to keep the house in order. But notice the dual nature of the token known as COMP, or COMP. In this ecosystem, COMP is a valid market, a token that can be lent and borrowed. But COMP is also the reward token paid out by the protocol to its users. And here is where the lines blur. When the contract sweeps the underlying tokens, it does not distinguish between the reserves earned from lending and the rewards waiting for users. It simply sees a balance and moves it all. Imagine an attacker watching the mempool. They see the treasury claim coming. Quietly, they call the comptroller to claim rewards on behalf of Morpho. The rewards flow into the contract, expecting to be distributed to users. But seconds later, the claim to treasury function executes. It sweeps everything away. The reserves and the user rewards, all sent to the treasury in one indiscriminate motion. The user's rewards are effectively stolen by the protocol's own housekeeping. The remedy, as is often the case, lies in separation. To hold the reserves in one hand and the rewards in the other, ensuring they never touch. Although the protocol noted the risk was small, the lesson is clear. Distinct purposes require distinct vessels. And as we accept the nature of mixed balances, Morpho has one more lesson for us, regarding the delicate nature of business logic. While the previous issue within Morpho concerned the flow of rewards, we now turn our attention to the very foundation of the protocol. How it calculates liquidity when interacting with Compound. Imagine the protocol acting as a vigilant guardian. To determine if a user is solvent, or if they are ready for liquidation, the system must measure their debts against their collateral. It iterates over every market the user has entered, gently summing up the numbers to find the truth of their position. But here, in the quiet logic of the isLiquidatable function, a discrepancy arises. When calculating the user's borrow balance, the code reaches for a value known as the last borrow pool index. It is a cached value, a memory of what the index used to be within Morpho's own storage. But time does not stop for a cache. You see, the underlying Compound protocol continues to update its own indexes. By using the internal cached version, Morpho is effectively looking at an old photograph of the market, while the real world moves on. This means Morpho might believe a user is safe, while on Compound they are actually underwater. Two realities, drifting apart. The resolution is one of synchronization. To restore harmony, the code was changed to look beyond its own memory. Instead of relying on the internal cache, the fix suggests using Compound's actual borrow index directly. By reading the live state, Morpho ensures its judgment matches the reality of the underlying protocol. And as we watch these two protocols synchronize their clocks, we prepare to enter the halls of Clover, where we will uncover a flaw in access control. While Morpho wrestled with the intricacies of internal accounting, we now turn our gaze to Clover, where the issue is one of holding on too tight. Imagine an order book, quietly accumulating value over time. Within the code there sits a function named simply collect fees. Its purpose is noble. It is meant to take the accumulated wealth in base tokens and quote tokens and gently distribute it to where it belongs, to the treasury and to the host. But notice the guard standing at the gate. A single line of code that says, "We require the sender to be the host." It seems protective, doesn't it? Ensuring only the creator can move the funds. But in this protection lies a quiet danger. By demanding that message edge sostic dorms.sender equals the host, the contract creates a single point of failure. If the host key is lost, or if the host simply vanishes into the night, the fees belonging to the DAO remain trapped, locked behind a door that no one else can open. Even though the funds are destined for the DAO cannot reach out to claim them. The solution is to let go. The developers realize that the destination of the funds is already fixed within the contract's heart. It does not matter who knocks on the door, only that the door opens. By removing the access control, anyone can trigger the function. The funds still go exactly where they are promised, to the treasury and the host. But now the flow cannot be stopped by a lost key. The single point of failure dissolves, and the river flows freely once more. And as we leave the open gates of Clover behind, we prepare to return to the world of Morpho, where a question of validation awaits in the dark. While Clover quietly corrected its gates of access control, our journey drifts downstream to the waters of Morpho. Here we find a protocol designed to mimic another, Morpho, striving to be the perfect reflection of Compound. It aims to follow every rule, every sanity check, moving in perfect synchronization with the layer beneath it. Like a shadow following a walker, it intends to stop when Compound stops, and move only when permitted. But reflections can be deceiving. In the deep logic of Compound there are safeguards. It watches the borrow caps, ensuring the lending limits are not breached. It checks the guardian status to see if a market has been paused. It is cautious. But Morpho, in this specific instance, did not look down. While Compound would reject a loan that exceeds the cap, Morpho's logic flowed freely, bypassing these checks entirely. It did not check if the market was deprecated. It did not ask if the guardian had paused the system. It simply assumed the path was clear, potentially allowing actions that the underlying protocol had explicitly forbidden. The resolution came not with a panic, but with a conversation about trade-offs. The developers realized that duplicating every single check requires gas, a heavy cost for the user. And so, the path forward was to document these differences, or carefully implement only what was truly needed, acknowledging that sometimes the layer above cannot perfectly mirror the layer below without becoming too heavy to move. And as we accept this imperfection in logic, we prepare to see how Morpho handles a race against time, where we will encounter the rushing winds of front-running. We leave behind the validation logic of our last chapter, yet we remain within the quiet, digital halls of the Morpho protocol. While the previous issue dealt with how we check data, this story is about how we order it. Imagine the matching engine, a peaceful conductor that stands between lenders and borrowers. Its job is simple. It organizes a queue, a list of those offering assets waiting patiently to be matched with someone who needs to borrow. It is designed to be fair, connecting the head of the list to the next incoming request. But in the shadows of the mempool, a watcher waits. This is where the front-runner hides. When a new request to borrow 100 units appears, the watcher moves faster than thought. Before the honest transaction can settle, the front-runner steps in. They supply a massive amount of assets, just enough to claim the very front of the line. The matching engine, following its rules, matches this new, massive supply instantly. The front-runner gets the reward, and then they withdraw the remaining assets, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. It is a subtle form of censorship. By constantly stepping to the front, they prevent the honest lenders at the head of the list from ever finding a match. They are effectively blocked, stuck in a queue that never moves. Usually we would speak of a code change here, a patch to lock the door. But in this case, the resolution is a philosophical acceptance. The developers realized that enforcing a strict first-in, first-out system would only invite a different storm, the risk of denial of service attacks. And so, the mechanism remains. The protocol accepts this frontrunner not as a bug, but as a feature of the open ocean, treating them simply as a whale with large capital, taking their place at the front. Sometimes, security is about choosing the lighter burden. And as we accept the nature of these digital whales, Morpho has one more intricate lesson to teach us about the logic of business. While the shadows of front-running faded from our last chapter, we remain within the architecture of Morpho. But this time, we drift toward the compound implementation. Here the code performs a solemn duty. It asks a simple question: is the user safe? The function, known as isLiquidatable, quietly compares the value of a user's debt against their maximum allowed limit. It is the guardian that decides when a position must be closed. To find the answer, the function wanders through every token the user has supplied or borrowed. It sums them up, piece by piece, trying to build a picture of solvency. But in this implementation, it forgets to look at the clock. The peer-to-peer indexes, the heartbeat of the interest accumulation, might be stale, old. If the user's balance rests heavily in the P2P market, the system calculates their safety based on the past, not the present. It is looking at a memory of the debt rather than its current reality. The remedy is a gentle ritual found elsewhere, in the Aave implementation. One must simply update the indexes before beginning the calculation, a small step to ensure the numbers are fresh. Yet, in this story, the resolution is complex. While the fix is known, always updating the P2P indexes before the logic runs, the developers hesitated. The cost of gas was deemed too high. Sometimes, perfection is weighed against the heavy price of execution. And as we leave the gas constraints of Morpho behind, the logic of Protocol D awaits us next. While Morpho navigated the complex currents of business logic, we now drift toward Protocol D, where the problem is not one of calculation, but of communication. Imagine a bridge, connecting Protocol D to the bustling markets of GMX v2. Here sits a function named GMX v2_update. It acts as a messenger, carrying instructions to adjust the size, the price, and the limits of an order. It is intended to be a seamless conversation between the protocol and the exchange router. The executor calls out, sending 5 specific pieces of data to the exchange router: the key, the size, the prices. It seems so orderly. But listen closely. There is a misunderstanding. The interface Protocol D defined does not match the reality of the GMX router. Like a key that almost fits the lock, but refuses to turn. Because the function signatures do not align, every attempt to update the order simply fails. The system is forced to take the long way around, closing positions entirely, only to open them again, wasting gas in a cycle of inefficiency. But clarity returns with a simple correction. The developers gently adjusted the interface, adding the missing parameters to the call. Now, the messenger speaks the correct language. The update function flows without resistance, and the costly workaround fades away. And as the communication lines of Protocol D are restored, we turn our gaze to the shiny protocol, to see what secrets it holds. While Protocol D wrestled with the complex flow of business logic, we now turn our gaze to something brighter. To the shiny protocol. Imagine a digital pawn shop. A quiet place where you might deposit a real-world asset NFT to secure a loan. The contract holds this asset, waiting patiently for the deadline. If the time passes without repayment, the manager steps in to liquidate. The code intends to close the book by burning the token, marking the end of the debt. It seems like a tidy ending, but look closer at the liquidation function. To close the loan, the contract calls out to the NFT itself, asking it to burn. But what if the NFT refuses to answer? Here is the oversight. If the underlying asset contract is paused, or if an address is blacklisted, that burn command fails. And because it fails, the entire liquidation reverts. The loan cannot end. The collateral is trapped, suspended in time, unable to be sold, unable to be returned. The solution is to untangle these threads. We must decouple the liquidation from the external state of the NFT contract. By allowing the loan to close, even if the burning must wait for another day, the flow is restored, the trap opens, and the system breathes again. And as we leave the shiny protocol, its loans no longer frozen, we drift toward protocol GTE to see what lessons await us there. While shiny protocol wrestled with its own internal logic, we now turn our gaze to GTE. Imagine a library with a single book, the Central Limit Order Book. This book lists all the bids, the promises to buy tokens at specific prices. But the book has a physical limit. It can only hold so many pages, so many orders. The logic seems sound. If the book is full and a new, higher price arrives, the contract assumes this new order is better. It gently removes the lowest, least competitive bid to make room for the new one. It is a cycle of improvement. But consider the vulnerability hidden in this efficiency. What if the new orders are merely illusions? A malicious actor can flood the book with high-priced bids. Because the prices are high, the contract sees them as valuable and forces the legitimate, patient orders out of the book. But here is the trick. The attacker sets these high orders to expire immediately, or cancels them the moment they enter. They are ghosts. They enter the room, push everyone else out, and then vanish. The result is an empty book, legitimate liquidity wiped away by phantom promises. To restore peace to the library, we must ask for commitment. The resolution is to enforce a minimum liveness time. If you place an order, it must sit still, like a stone in a garden, for at least 10 minutes. You cannot cancel it. You cannot let it expire instantly. You must risk having it filled. This risk chases the ghosts away. And as we see how GTE anchored its orders in time, Blueberry Protocol waits on the horizon to show us the slippery nature of front-running. While GTE wrestled with its own medium severity concerns, we now drift gently toward the Blueberry Protocol. Deep within the Itchy Vault spell contract, there lies a mechanism for withdrawal. When a user wishes to unwind their position, the code must perform a delicate dance. It needs to swap a released token to repay a debt. It turns to the Uniswap v3 pool to facilitate this exchange, trusting the market to return a fair value. But let us look closer at the swap function. When it calls the pool, it must define a limit, a price point where it refuses to trade. Yet in the vulnerable code we see it passing the max SQRT E+1. Do you hear what that implies? It is effectively telling the market, I will accept absolutely any price. It is walking into a volatile marketplace with its eyes closed. In the quiet dark of the mempool, this is dangerous. A sandwich attack can slip in, pushing the price wildly out of balance before the trade executes, and pulling it back after. The attacker pockets the profit, and the user is left with a fraction of what they deserved. To bring safety back to this garden, we must introduce boundaries. The resolution is to require a slippage parameter from the user, ensuring the amount of borrowed token received is within expectation. Alternatively, the contract could gently consult an oracle to estimate a fair price before committing to the swap. And as the Blueberry protocol learns to set these safe limits, the Telcoin update waits on the horizon, ready to show us the dangers of front-running in a new light. While the Blueberry protocol drifted through the turbulent waters of slippage and front-running, we now turn our gaze to the Telcoin update. Here, the vulnerability is similar, yet it plays out in a different shadow. Imagine a stablecoin contract resting peacefully on the blockchain. Within its logic, there exists a tool for order, a function called add blacklist. It is designed to be a shield. When a malicious actor is discovered, the protocol administrators can call this function to freeze the bad actor's address, and subsequently use a function called remove black funds to seize the stolen assets. It feels like justice, doesn't it? A way to reclaim what was taken. But consider the nature of the blockchain's waiting room, the mempool. When the administrator sends the transaction to blacklist the thief, that command sits there, waiting to be included in a block. And the thief is watching. The thief sees the pending doom approaching, and so they act with speed. They construct a transaction to move their funds out of the wallet, perhaps to a mixer or a fresh address. Crucially, they attach a much higher gas fee than the administrator did. The network validators, driven by profit, pick up the thief's transaction first. By the time the blacklist transaction settles, the wallet is already empty. The shield was raised too late. The front run was successful. To resolve this, we must stop trying to win a foot race we are destined to lose. The fix is found in a change of mechanism, inspired by the staking module. Rather than relying on a race to seize funds, the contract should ensure that the very act of withdrawing checks the user's status first. By integrating the check deeply into the withdrawal logic, front-running becomes useless. The funds remain secure, not because we were faster, but because the exit was truly barred. And as we see how Telcoin learned to close the gates in time, the Maya DAO ecosystem awaits us next, to show us the dizzying circles of re-entrancy. While the Telcoin update struggled with the frantic pace of front-running, we now turn our gaze to the Maya DAO ecosystem. Here, the trouble is not about speed, but about the quiet erasure of debt. Imagine a bridge connecting different worlds, the root bridge agent. It allows users to perform actions across chains using what we call a virtual account. Naturally, moving between these worlds requires energy. It requires gas. And the system dutifully tracks this cost, writing the initial gas and user fee info into its storage, like writing a tab on a chalkboard. But notice the function named AnyExecute. It relies on these storage notes to calculate the final bill. However, there is a way to make the system forget. If a user initiates a specific call from the Arbitrum branch, they can trigger a re-entrancy, looping back into AnyExecute before the first visit is done. As the inner loop finishes its work, it wipes the chalkboard clean. It deletes the gas information. When the original call finally wakes up to pay its bill, it looks for the cost, but finds nothing. The variables are gone. The execution becomes free, drifting through the system without paying its way. The The wisdom to fix this is simple. One must hold these values close, in local memory, rather than on the public wall of storage. Yet, this specific hall will remain as it is. Since the architects are migrating to layer 0, this quiet loophole is left behind, a ghost in the code. And as we step away from this unpayable debt in the Maya DAO, we remain within their ecosystem to uncover a different flaw in their business logic. While the Maya DAO ecosystem previously wrestled with the dizzying loops of reentrancy, we remain within their digital walls to witness a quieter yet equally dangerous failure. Let us look at the AnyCall protocol. Think of it as a bridge builder designed to carry messages and transactions across the vast, empty spaces between different blockchains. To make this journey, a user must provide fuel, gas, not just for the destination, but for a safety net called the fallback. It is a prudent system. If the transaction fails on the other side, the fallback ensures there is enough energy to retreat safely. It is a promise of solvency. But here, in the accounting logic, a mistake is made in the arithmetic of abundance. When the system calculates the cost of execution on the root chain, it looks at the deposited gas. If there is extra gas, more than needed for the immediate task, the code makes a greedy assumption. It takes that excess and adds it to the accumulated fees. Do you see the oversight? By sweeping the excess into the fees, the protocol accidentally consumes the portion that was meant to be saved. It spends the reserve. So when the time comes to fund the any fallback on the branch chain, the vault is empty. It happens on the branch chain too. There, the excess is sent back to the recipient, again leaving nothing reserved for the fallback on the root. It is a recipe for insolvency. The gas budget in the configuration becomes a fiction, promising resources that have already been spent. The resolution comes with a gentle restructuring of priorities. To fix this, we must not be so hasty to count our profits. The developers must change the logic to deduct the fallback gas first, subtracting it from the deposited gas before calculating any fees or refunds. We secure the safety net before we enjoy the surplus. With this change, the accounting becomes honest again, and the bridge remains solvent. And as we see how Maya DAO balanced its books to prevent insolvency, we prepare to see how they handle a different kind of obstruction, where a denial of service lurks between the signed and the unsigned. While the Maya DAO ecosystem faced complexities in its business logic before, we remain within its walls to examine a quieter, yet equally disruptive silence. We find ourselves in the root bridge agent. Think of it as a gatekeeper for the Ulysses omnichain, a sophisticated mechanism designed to move value across the vastness of different networks. To facilitate this travel, the contract must perform swaps, exchanging tokens to pay for gas, ensuring the journey is funded. It reaches out to Uniswap v3, trusting the pool to return the correct amounts. But there is a nuance in how Uniswap speaks. When tokens leave a pool, Uniswap returns a negative number, a delta, representing the outflow. The root bridge agent receives this negative value in functions like gas swap in and gas swap out. It intends to cast this number into an unsigned integer, a positive counting number. And here is where the translation fails. In the language of Solidity, if you take a negative number and force it directly into an unsigned type, it wraps around. It becomes an astronomically large positive number. The contract then tries to fit this massive, impossible number into a smaller container using the safecast library. The library, seeing a number far too large to handle, does the only thing it can. It reverts. The transaction fails. The bridge closes. A complete denial of service for the omnichain, all because of a misunderstood negative sign. The resolution is gentle. We simply need to listen to what the numbers are telling us. By manually negating the return value, flipping that negative back to a positive before we cast it, the numbers align. The massive overflow vanishes, replaced by the correct, manageable amount. And as the root bridge agent begins to flow smoothly once more, we turn our gaze toward Union Finance, where a different danger lurks in the form of front-running. While the Maya DAO ecosystem struggled with the stillness of a denial of service, we now drift toward the Union Finance update. Here we find a vulnerability that relies not on stopping motion, but on moving too quickly. We enter the realm of the exchange rate stored function. Imagine a quiet pool of water, representing the protocol's liquidity. The exchange rate tells us the value of the pool's tokens, the U tokens, relative to the underlying assets. When a borrower repays a loan, they pour interest back into this pool, and the water level rises. The value of everyone's tokens goes up. It is a natural, healthy cycle. But notice the timing. In the original code, this rise in value, driven by the variable total redeemable, happens instantly within the repay borrow fresh function. It is an immediate, sharp spike in the exchange rate. And here is where the shadow moves. An observer, watching the mempool, sees a large repayment approaching. Just before that repayment settles, they slip in. They mint U tokens at the old, lower rate. Then, the repayment executes. The water level rises. The exchange rate jumps up. And immediately, the observer leaves. They redeem their tokens at the new, higher rate, capturing the profit from the interest that was meant for the long-term lenders. A classic front-running attack, stealing value in the blink of an eye. To restore fairness to the waters, the resolution suggests looking to time itself. By implementing a time-weighted average price, or TTWAP, we smooth out these sudden spikes. The exchange rate no longer jumps violently. It curves gently, making such quick attacks unprofitable. And as Union Finance finds stability in the slow passage of time, Hubble Exchange waits to show us the dangers of returning too soon, with re-entrancy. While Union Finance faced the frantic, hurried pace of front-running, we now turn our gaze to Hubble Exchange. Here the issue is not about speed, but about a heavy, burdensome repetition. Let us drift into the architecture of the VUSD contract. Imagine it as a simple, orderly queue. Users arrive to mint tokens, and later they stand in line to withdraw them. It is a cycle of deposit and release, intended to be rhythmic and fair. The code allows users to withdraw their funds to a contract, trusting that the transaction will close peacefully. But within this trust lies a quiet oversight. The functions for minting with reserves and withdrawing, they lack a specific guard. They are open doors that swing both ways at once. Watch what a malicious shadow can do here. They ask to withdraw. The contract begins to send the funds. But the moment those funds touch the attacker's contract, it triggers a hidden trap. Before the first withdrawal is finished, the attacker reaches back into Hubble Exchange. They deposit the funds they just received and immediately ask to withdraw them again. Over and over. It is a griefing attack. By creating this loop, they lengthen the queue artificially. Innocent users waiting behind them are forced to process these meaningless transactions. Their gas is wasted, their energy drained, stuck behind a door that keeps spinning. To restore peace to the queue, the solution is gentle but firm. The developers apply the non-reentrant modifier. This simple lock ensures that once a user begins to leave, they cannot turn around and re-enter until the door has fully closed. The loop is broken, and the line moves freely once more. And as we see how Hubble Exchange secured its doors against the echo of re-entrancy, Morpho will soon show us how even the soundest business logic can sometimes lose its way. While Hubble Exchange wrestled with the chaotic loops of re-entrancy, we now turn our gaze to Morpho. Here, the vulnerability is not a loop, but a fleeting illusion. Imagine a marketplace, gently humming with activity. Borrowers stand in a queue, patiently waiting to be matched with lenders peer-to-peer, hoping for that perfect, lower interest rate. The contract, the markets manager, oversees this delicate dance, ensuring that when supply meets demand, a credit line is formed. It is a system designed for efficiency, for balance. But notice, the system is trusting. It assumes that if a lender arrives with a mountain of assets, they intend to stay. But what if they don't? Here is where the grief lies. An attacker can perform a single, massive transaction. First, they supply a huge amount of capital, enough to satisfy every borrower in the queue. The contract, eager to please, immediately updates the state. It creates a peer-to-peer credit line for everyone. The borrowers believe they have found their match. But then, in the very same breath, the attacker withdraws everything. The capital is gone, but the damage to the logic remains. The borrowers are left in a state that believes they were matched, yet the liquidity has vanished. This forces them into a worse interest rate than they started with. It is a griefing attack, a quiet act of sabotage that degrades the experience for everyone involved. The remedy for such a fleeting storm? One must consider mitigations for these single transaction flash attacks, perhaps by preventing a supply and withdraw in the same block, or locking the state just for a moment. In this instance, the architects at Morpho acknowledged the shadow. They chose to leave it be for now, waiting to refactor the entire queue system in the future. Sometimes, code must simply endure the imperfection. And as we leave the queues of Morpho to their waiting, we see the shadow of griefing lengthen, as Iwa prepares to show us the dangers of front-running. While Morpho navigated the complex currents of business logic, we now drift gently towards the Iwa protocol. Here, the vulnerability is not in the calculation, but in the visibility of the message itself. Imagine a user who wishes to interact with the protocol. To make things smooth, they sign a permit off-chain. It is a digital permission slip, allowing the contract to spend tokens on their behalf without a separate transaction. The user bundles this signature with their main action, perhaps a function called start, and sends it out into the network. It floats there, in the mempool, waiting to be included in a block. But the mempool is a public place. Anyone can see the transactions waiting there, and here lies the oversight. A watcher, perhaps malicious, or perhaps just a bot, sees this permit. They see the signature, the R, the S, and the V values, and they can copy them. The watcher submits the exact same permit function call, but with a higher gas fee. Their transaction races ahead. The network processes the watcher's call first, consuming the signature and approving the tokens. It seems harmless, doesn't it? The tokens are approved either way. But wait. When the user's original transaction finally arrives, it attempts to call permit again. But the signature has already been used. The nonce is spent. The contract, expecting a fresh signature, reverts the entire transaction. The user's action fails, blocked by a ghost of their own making. To restore peace to this process, the developers introduced a gentle acceptance. The fix is to wrap the permit call within a try-catch block. Now the contract attempts to use the permit. If it succeeds, wonderful. But if it fails, perhaps because it was front-run, the contract simply catches the error and checks the allowance. If the allowance is already there, it proceeds calmly, ignoring the turbulence, ensuring the user's journey completes without interruption. And as we see how Iwa learned to flow around obstacles, we prepare to return to Morpho, where another lesson in business logic awaits our tired eyes. While Iwa struggled against the noise of a grief attack, we now drift towards the quiet halls of Morpho. Here, in the Morpho Aave deployment, the code attempts to manage the delicate balance between lenders and borrowers. There exists a specific feature, a switch if you will, intended to stop liquidators from seizing a specific asset as collateral. It sounds like a shield, designed to protect the vault. But consider a user, resting comfortably, their loan supported by this very asset. The administrators decide to flip the switch, intended to prevent seizure, but the logic ripples unexpectedly. You see, the protection does not extend to the users on Morpho in the way one might hope. When the asset is turned off as collateral, the Morpho system suddenly believes the user holds nothing of value to back their loan. In that moment of disconnect, the user loses their collateral status. And because the system thinks they are now under-collateralized, they are immediately liquidated. The shield became a sword. The resolution comes with a gentle realization about timing. The developers understood that this feature cannot be changed while the system is in motion. It must be decided at the dawn, right from the beginning, and not toggled when users are already leaning their weight upon the asset. Clarity was restored. The rules were rewritten to ensure the switch is never flipped while a user sleeps soundly under its protection. And as the collateral settles back into place, we remain within the architecture of Morpho to witness how a simple logic flow can bring everything to a halt. We linger for a moment longer within the architecture of Morpho. While the previous logic flaw was subtle, this next issue resides in the very mechanics of departure. Imagine a user, a peer-to-peer supplier, wishing to withdraw their funds. They call upon the exit positions manager, asking to leave. The contract dutifully attempts to satisfy this request. To ensure there is enough liquidity to pay the user, the algorithm takes a final, logical step. It attempts to borrow the necessary amount from the underlying pool. But here, we find a quiet space between the rules. Aave's markets have two critical lines in the sand: the maximum loan-to-value ratio and the liquidation threshold. What happens if a position floats exactly between them? If the debt is higher than the allowed borrowing limit, the borrow fails. Yet because the value is still lower than the liquidation threshold, the position cannot be liquidated. The user is trapped in a state of mathematical limbo, unable to borrow to exit, yet safe from the liquidator's hand. The withdrawal simply fails. This is a difficult knot to untie within the current system. It relies on these hard withdrawals to function. The developers acknowledge this silent stalemate. However, as Morpho begins its journey on Compound, where only a single collateral factor exists, this specific limbo fades away for now. Sometimes the solution is simply a change of terrain. And as we leave the intricacies of Morpho behind, we drift toward the horizon, where Aave v4 waits to reveal its own secrets. While Morpho wrestled with the heavy chains of denial of service, we now gently turn our attention to Aave v4. Here, within the spoke contract, we find a vulnerability not of malice, but of delicate timing, and the fragility of numbers. Imagine a user moving through the system. They wish to perform a simple action, perhaps withdrawing collateral or borrowing funds. The protocol, like a diligent guardian, stands ready to check their health factor. It asks the question, is this user solvent enough to proceed? And at that specific moment, the answer is yes. But let us look closer at the logic, specifically within the withdraw function. The code reduces the supplied shares, and then it validates the position. But here is the oversight. The system checks the health factor before fully settling the premium debt. You see, the act of interacting with the protocol triggers an update, a tiny recalculation of debt. Because the validation happened just a moment too early, or perhaps due to a microscopic rounding error in the system's design, the user's health factor shifts. They complete their withdrawal successfully, but in the very next breath, they have fallen below the threshold. They are immediately liquidatable, punished for an action the system just told them was safe. To restore harmony, we must refine the design. We smooth out the rough edges of rounding operations to prevent the creation of instant, phantom debt. And more importantly, we introduce a new law to the code, an invariant test. A promise that says, if a user successfully completes a borrow or a withdraw, they cannot be liquidatable in the same heartbeat. With the math now precise and the timeline corrected, the Aave vault is secure. But as we drift from these corrected calculations, Morpho awaits us once again to show us another subtle twist in business logic. While Aave v4 navigated the currents of its own design, we now drift gently toward the Morpho protocol. Here, within the Morpho governance contract, we find the concept of a deprecated market. Think of it as a room in a vast house that is meant to be closed off, a signal that this market has served its time and should no longer be used. It is a state intended for retirement, where the code should simply rest. Yet in the silence of the logic, a quiet contradiction remained. You see, when a market was marked as deprecated, the system forgot to check if the door was actually locked. Borrowing was not automatically disabled. Even though the sign on the door said closed, the mechanism to borrow funds remained wide open. A user, perhaps wandering through the contract's options, could step into this retired market, take out a loan, and suddenly find themselves eligible for liquidation. A ghost market, still haunting the protocol, capable of trapping those who interacted with it. The resolution comes with a gentle enforcement of order. The fix ensures that before a market can be deprecated, borrowing must be explicitly paused. The code now demands consistency. The transaction will revert if one tries to retire a market that is still active. Now, if the market is to sleep, the activity must stop first. And as Morpho aligns its state with its intent, the immutable smart contracts quietly approach, bringing with them the complexities of the 164th rule and the risk of denial. And from Morpho's business logic, we arrive at our final stop. Immutable smart contracts. Here we find a bridge, connecting worlds, guarding the flow of value. This contract, the root ERC20 predicate, acts like a gatekeeper watching a river. It implements a withdrawal queue, a safety dam, designed to catch sudden floods of value before they can cause harm. It waits for specific signs to lower the gates. If a token is unknown, or if a withdrawal is simply too large, the queue activates, asking everyone to wait, just for a moment, to ensure safety. But here lies the trouble with shared waters. The queue is global. It affects the entire bridge. Imagine Eve watching Alice trying to cross the bridge back to mainnet. Eve can act first. She initiates a transfer, just large enough to exceed the flow rate capacity for that specific token. The system reacts exactly as programmed. It sees the capacity breached and activates the queue. But because the mechanism is shared, Alice, who did nothing wrong, finds her path blocked. She is forced to wait, simply because the river was artificially swollen by another. It is a denial of service, born from a safety feature working a little too broadly. To calm these waters, the solution is to separate the streams. Instead of a single global queue that halts the world, we explore queues for each specific token. If one stream floods, the others flow on, undisturbed. We also learn to watch the buckets, adjusting the limits as value fluctuates, ensuring the bridge remains open for the honest traveler. And with that, our journey through these vulnerabilities ends. Rest well. Good night.